This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
This episode is brought to you by Bleacher Report. How do you follow sports? From college football to the NBA, Bleacher Report brings you the latest news, live scores, and epic highlights from your favorite leagues, teams, and athletes, all in one app. Dive into exclusive shows hosted by your favorite athletes and original Bleacher Report series with breaking news, rumors, and predictions all season long. Download Bleacher Report to personalize your coverage.
Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. You know, one of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
The Athletic. The race is on, and 2025 is here, so with last year disappearing in the rearview mirror, it's time for us to hit the key battlegrounds of the coming season and ask how they might play out. I'm Edd Straw, and joining us for the first podcast of the new year are Mark Hughes and special guest, Nelson Valkenburg. Well, Nelson, welcome back again. Viaplay's finest. That's what we should introduce you as.
Well, I'm pretty sure that's not the case, but I'll take it. So at the beginning of the year.
Absolutely. And presumably you've had a great Christmas and celebrated the new year in the traditional way, whatever that is for you.
Well, it was such a good party, I remember hardly anything of it.
Do you know, I'm having a very similar problem. How about you, Mark? Happy New Year and all that. Do you remember the Christmas period that's definitely happened very well?
Let me check. Yeah, I guess I went into the North Sea on Boxing Day for the Boxing Day dip. I guess Nelson was doing the same at the opposite coast of the same sea.
Opposite side of the globe, in the ocean surrounding Colombia.
Okay.
Yeah,
I feel that'll be warmer.
It is warmer.
Yeah,
it is definitely warmer.
Maybe this is where I've been going wrong. Yeah,
Excellent. So we've definitely gone well with the pretense that we've definitely got into 2025 when we're recording this. So well done, everyone. But it doesn't matter exactly when we're recording it because 2025 could be a really fascinating season. So in honour of that, we're going to look ahead at some of the big storylines or the big battlegrounds as we're framing it. So let's get on with it. Mark, probably the biggest storyline of 2025 is Lewis Hamilton heading to Ferrari. Charles Leclerc's the established team leader. But Hamilton is the one with statistically the greatest F1 CV in history. So what will decide the fight between that duo?
Well, at its most basic level, raw speed. And, after the season Lewis has just had, where he's been comprehensively outperformed by a teammate for the first time in his career, that's where the question marks are. There's no questions around Charles Leclerc's speed. And so, if anything, Lewis is coming in a little bit as the underdog, despite the unparalleled career CV. But I don't think it's as clear cut as that in reality. I think there's a feasible reason why Lewis has struggled with this particular Mercedes, to do with the how little it pitches and dives, and how that sort of really doesn't work with the way he naturally likes to drive the car. The Ferrari doesn't seem to be quite so extreme in that, and it seems to be a car that you can hustle on corner entry, as Charles Leclerc showed many times. So that's the trait of last year's car, and it's something which has been in the Ferrari DNA for the last 3 or 4 years. So it wouldn't be a surprise if it was in this year's, in the 25 car as well. So that being the case, will it dovetail well with Lewis's driving style? If so, I think we're in for an incredible competition between them.
It's such an interesting matchup, isn't it, Nelson? Because there aren't actually many cases where you have a driver like Leclerc who's kind of done his time, he's built up at Ferrari, he keeps getting better, he's 27 years old, so he's the obvious team leader. And then you've got this all-time great going in alongside him. And it's such a fascinating battle, I think.
Yes, and both need the best season of their lives, basically, at this point. But I believe in the project Vasseur is actually putting down, and it's starting to gel really well. I don't believe Hamilton will be on par with Leclerc every weekend, but he'll be a lot closer than he was this year. I tend to agree with Mark that it could work out really well. And I really believe Ferrari is actually in a good place next year, even though keeping Carlos Sainz would have been great as well. They're going to go really well for the upcoming season.
I do think that the Vasseur's Ferrari is the perfect Ferrari for Hamilton to join. I think if it had been under some of the previous regimes, it could have gone quite badly wrong. But I don't know about you, Mark, but I find Vasseur a very reassuring presence at Ferrari because he doesn't react too much and too over the top to the highs. He doesn't overreact to the lows. He just keeps everything process focused, put one foot in front of the other. And that's probably perfect for a driver like Hamilton, on top of the fact that obviously Vasseur knows him of old, having run him in F3 and GP2.
Yeah, Fred's a very steadying, calming influence, which is important not just in the context of Hamilton joining, but in the whole vibe of the whole team and how it's traditionally been. And yes, step by step, Frederick seems to be putting the pieces in place to make really good long-term progress, and is beginning to get Ferrari into the sort of shape where it could be delivering on its full potential quite soon, I think. And operationally, we've all seen it evolve into a much slicker team than it was 2 or 3 years ago. They've gone their own direction technically, and it's working. They're not 1 year behind everyone and copying like they had got into that loop. I think they're on a good, productive direction. I think there's a good team spirit there, and yeah, the relationship Freddie has with both of those drivers, having run them in the junior categories as well, is exceptional. And I think if you asked him whose two favourite drivers have been when he was running his own team, I think it would be Hamilton and Leclerc. So he's got his dream team together, and I think that can only help.
If they have a strong first 3 months, the next 3 months will be key. If they come out of the block flying, that team could be very interesting and difficult to stop if they get everything right at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, very, very much so. I was at Maranello before Christmas for Fred Vasseur doing the annual media lunch at the end of season. And again, just a very, very calming, sensible presence, which can't be underestimated in terms of the value to a team like Ferrari, which often needs a calming presence. But that seems to reflect on everybody else who's working there. They very, very much understand just the value of just doing what you do, just being sensible. And it sounds obvious, but it's so valuable. But what I'm really interested in is, so far, Nelson, we've talked about can Hamilton pick up after what I think most of us would agree was his least impressive season in Formula One in 2024. Still a good season, but least impressive in a very impressive body of work. But Hamilton at his best versus Leclerc at its best is actually a really interesting possibility. It's not, is Hamilton at his best, therefore he'll comfortably be leading. It's, is Hamilton at his best so he can actually take the fight to Leclerc? This could be such a fascinating pairing. Yeah,
more so on the Sunday, you'd imagine, than on the Saturday. But we've seen this year what happens to Hamilton when it clicks, when it works, mostly on the Sundays. But Silverstone was devastating. Spa was excellent. But even the last few races of the 2024 season, those Sunday drives were really good. And he was struggling with motivation, with confidence at that point. So imagine what happens if he gets that back, gets his confidence back, and he really sees, okay, you all see Leclerc as the next future world champion. Well, I'm here too, and I'm going to show you that it could provide such an interesting dynamic that I'm really looking forward to it. And I believe he will succeed. It doesn't mean that he'll take another title, but he will succeed there.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? Whether a title is possible is entirely dependent on the relative competitiveness of Ferrari. That's not going to be entirely within his hands. But you'd have to say, Mark, Leclerc is not going to be an easy rival, because the area where Leclerc's really improved, and to be honest, he was always good in this area, but he's getting better and better and better in terms of the way he works on Sundays. Vasseur talked about this, saying that he's just got better in the management of everything, not just tyre management, race management, the management of his approach. He's kind of a finished article as Charles Leclerc. We've had years of him building up, and the pace has always been there, but he's just got better and better and better and better. So this is almost the phrase, I guess, would be, this is potentially a peak Leclerc, certainly the peak compared to where he's been, but he could be entering the period where he's at his absolute best now against a Hamilton who could very well still be capable of his best.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think I don't think it would be accurate to say he doesn't have weaknesses. He does, and he acknowledges them. He said that, he on a low downforce circuit, he can't make his attacking style work as well as he can on higher downforce tracks. There's sometimes where he needs to find that balancing point between the two. He's still struggles a little bit with that, but these are just like little fine-tuning things, and even a driver as experienced as Hamilton will know he has his own weaknesses, and he might not be as forward in talking about them, but he will know what they are and how to work around them, just as Charles will. So, yeah, I don't think there's any lack of data or experience that's going to interfere in this contest between them. And I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating.
Just shows how much we still have to rate George Russell's season, that we think of Hamilton in these terms for the upcoming year. George was excellent, and he'll probably continue as well.
That's absolutely true. There's some seriously good drivers in Formula One at the moment. I know that's always the case, but there's great depth at the sharp end. Let's move on now to our next topic, Nelson, which is picking up on the championship battle that never was in 2024 between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. Do you think Norris can actually make this happen this year? Does he stand a chance against Verstappen? And of course, few people have had quite as much time interviewing Verstappen as you for Viaplay this over the past few years. So you certainly have the Verstappen side covered.
It is going to be super interesting how everybody gets out of the blocks in a few weeks, because they're all going to be tempted to switch off their development cycle and go into 2026 mode fairly quickly. So you're going to be very dependent on how you get out of the blocks. Now, if McLaren starts the way they finished, they are going to be super hard to beat. And Norris is the type of driver that when he's almost like, was it Scott Mitchell who said that he compares him a little bit to Valtteri Bottas in a way that if he gets his qualifying nailed down, he can be devastatingly quick from the front. That is definitely true. If Verstappen can hang on, he will make it interesting, assuming the Red Bull isn't as good as the McLaren. But you'd have to think in Norris' situation, everything he has learned in the past 2 years, also about himself, if he wants it to happen, it needs to happen in 2025, because the rest is going to be a question mark. He knows he'll have a good car this year. He needs to make it happen. And that will bring its own set of pressures and problems. But if he can't withstand that, then he's in trouble anyway. So I think he can make it work, but the start of the season is going to be extremely important.
Yeah, and everything was so close at the back end of last year, it's impossible to say with any certainty which teams are going to be at the front. It could well be all three of those that were fighting out the front last year over the course of the season, plus Mercedes, who kind of flitted in and out of that. But Mark, in terms of Norris, do you think Mexico perhaps showed the way he's set out his stall to try and take on Max Verstappen, in that he knows ultimately, if it just comes to sheer racing ruthlessness, Verstappen's always going to prevail, isn't he? Because he's just so strong on that. But Norris is going to try and sort of take a more cerebral approach and try and just make sure he plays the rules to his advantage, get things exactly right, and has the edge from that in terms of, well, drawing a mistake out of Verstappen as he did in Mexico, that second move when Max just carried way too much speed in and was no chance of making a move. That was a slightly flustered driver. So is that the way Norris has to approach it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I saw that as a mistake by Max. I saw it as a
choice.
Calculated reaction. Yeah, as a choice, as a calculated reaction to what had just happened, with the knowledge before the lights had even changed that any contact between them would just freeze Max's points advantage if neither of them finished. And I think his every move carried that implicit message. And he, I think, was irritated at how Lando had not given the place back from passing him off the circuit as he saw it. And so he just thought, okay, I'll just repass you off the circuit then. And I think if you want to block, we crash. And I think that will always be Max's in extremis when he needs to. That will be how he drives. And I don't think Lando will ever drive in that way. You can only really, in extremis, be yourself. And I think Lando has to build around his own strengths. And yeah, I think certainly not letting Max get into his head. But at the same time, I think there may have to be an element at some point of, okay, we crash. And I think if that happens and Max understands the point at which you cannot go past with Lando, then Max will race him in a different way. But it may take two or three incidents before that happens. So yeah.
We shouldn't forget about the Austrian Grand Prix last year. That's the point where I thought, okay, he has decided to race Max the way Max races the rest. And it didn't end well. But at that point, Lando didn't believe in any title prospect. So he was free to do what he wanted. Then suddenly the car became quite dominant. And he thought, hang on here, I need to be clever. And I need to race for points instead of daily victories. And if McLaren can avoid falling behind at the beginning of the year, be right in the mix, and the same goes for Ferrari as well, from the first few races, that changes the dynamic, as Mark says, in the way Verstappen can race, because he's not defending at that point a points lead, and maybe it may be the other way around. You don't know, and that could alter everything, alter every perspective we have on that. So it could be quite interesting there.
That's very true. I think the really interesting thing about those two is they do have different approaches and different styles. And this is what you want to see in Formula One. You want drivers who do have slightly different kind of go-to characteristics and that kind of thing, because that makes for really, really interesting battles and racing. So, yeah, we're very much looking forward to seeing Verstappen versus Norris and those drivers being up against any number of other ones. But certainly you'd say that Norris needs to show he's just sharpened the edges a little bit after what we saw from him last year.
Looking for a pickup truck to get just about anything done? Look no further. The Chevy Silverado EV isn't just the most powerful Silverado ever, with next-level towing capability and technology. It also offers game-changing versatility with the available multi-flex midgate and tailgate, which means Silverado EV helps you carry large, bulky, and oddly shaped items up to nearly 11 feet in length. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive. Visit Chevrolet.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first, like to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Let's move on to our third battleground now, Mark. We're calling this one Mercedes versus physics, given Toto Wolff loves to describe the team's struggles as a physics problem as opposed to one with mystics. So can Mercedes finally crack it and produce a consistent car?
I like the idea of a mystical Formula One car development. That's interesting.
Maybe they've disregarded that. Perhaps that is the problem. They need, get a few druids into Brackley, various other forms of mysticism, all sorts. Go around the world, get everyone in, see which one works.
No, just call it the Einstein and then disregard the laws of physics.
Yeah, I think Mercedes still hadn't mastered completely mastered the ground effect regulations with this car, although it was the best of the three that we've seen in 3 consecutive years of this regulation set. It could be extremely good, dominant even, when everything was right, when it was a nice cool track, or it was a nice smooth track, or the corners were all fast, but it was some combination of that. But that's not how you're not going to win a championship with a car like that. You're just going to win the odd race. So it appears to be where they've pitched the aero map, and that they have to, when they raise the car, they lose too much downforce. So when you're at tracks that the curb usage is important, or which are bumpy, then it's not competitive. And I think this all feeds in also into tyre usage, and I think they're a little bit behind the ball there, particularly behind McLaren, in terms of how you get heat into the tyres and retain heat into the tyres, how quickly you can generate it without then overheating them. I think there's a little bit of science still needs to be applied there, and I'm sure they are applying it, and they're a bunch of very clever people, so I wouldn't write off the idea that they could come out of the blocks with a fast car. But you have to say, of the four teams, the four leading teams, they're the one with the biggest question mark beside them. And I think it's quite interesting, of those four teams, two of them, McLaren and Mercedes, were very well advanced with aeroelastic front wings, and that turned out to become the dominant technical feature of the season, and it made Red Bull's very clever aerodynamics almost obsolete. The way that they had done such a very sophisticated floor design incorporated with a very clever suspension, the way it worked, and that carried Red Bull to 2 years of dominance, and then two and a bit years of dominance. And that was sort of instantly made obsolete by McLaren, and then subsequently Mercedes got onto the same technology. So Ferrari didn't follow that route, and Red Bull didn't follow that route, but depending on which way they see the wind going in terms of how the FIA is going to regulate on this for 25. If they have done, it's going to be fascinating to see if there's going to be a competitive reset if we see all four teams pursuing that technology rather than just two of them. So, yeah, I think Mercedes has a head start over Red Bull and Ferrari on that particular technology, but it has catching up to do in other technologies. So it's a shuffling. I think a shuffling up is going to be quite interesting to observe.
Yeah, and the indications recently from the FIA is that in terms of the Flexi Aero, they're not really going to change what they're doing in 2025. 2026, there could well be some changes, but nothing massive in 25. But of course, sometimes they have to react to what's happening, as we saw last year. So you never know. That's always going to be a grey area, because you've got two bits in the rules. You've got one that bodywork can't move, can't be flexible, but of course it has to be a little bit. And then it's how much do you actually allow? So there's a gap between what the rules technically say, which is impossible, and the load tests, and it's what you allow. That's really interesting. But Nelson, how do you think we should be regarding Mercedes? Because for a while they were the team that had just not got to grips with the regulations, and it was the question of when will they get back there on top of things. But they've been out of that zone for a while now. You can drop the ball for a year and then get back going again. But there's a point where you kind of lose that status, don't you? And you go back to being sort of just a team that's sort of pushing at the back of the front group. So, is there any reason to expect more from Mercedes this year?
Well, I'm pretty sure they expect more from themselves for this year. But I don't know about you, Mark, but I continuously felt in the second half of the season that teams, almost every team on the grid, didn't quite understand why they were bad or good in a given weekend. Yeah. Of course, McLaren knew they were quite good at most weekends, but even when things didn't go as planned, they seemed to be surprised by it. Ferrari didn't expect to be great in Austin, were unbeatable there, and so for Mercedes it feels like they're a little bit in the dark still of what makes them good on a given weekend, and especially what makes them bad. And if they can't tackle that, it is problematic for this year, but it is also problematic in the grander scheme of things, because Toto still hasn't given up on Max. We know that it could be a very interesting season if the Red Bull isn't as competitive as they want. But then Mercedes has to show a turn of speed they haven't shown so far. So there's a lot of pressure coming from all different sides on this question. And what I admire about Mercedes is that how they've stuck together. They've not pointed the finger at anyone, but they haven't changed it as much as well. They've really relied on the core group of people from their heyday, as it were. And that may not be enough with this regulation set. It clearly needs a different way of thinking. They've gotten closer, but I don't believe they've cracked it. And will they crack it then for the final year of this regulation set? I don't know. I really don't.
I think the interesting question as well is how this unpredictability and people aren't sure how strong they'll be at certain tracks is just down to the fact things are really close, and just concept with these cars is really where you had conceive the cars to be at their optimum in terms of ride heights, all of these factors, your sensitivity. There's so many factors, and it might just be that's the thing. There's so many like little shuffles. You don't just get a car that has a sort of set performance level, and it will just move in and out from week to week. And because you're dealing with cars that will move about a little bit with conditions, and other cars that will move about with conditions and track characteristics and this, that and the other, it makes it much harder to judge, which I think's great. You've also got that great question with Mercedes, Mark, of Russell being the undisputed team leader now. I think that one is pretty much a given. He's proved he can do that. And then you've got the wild card that is Kimi Antonelli feeding into it as well. If Mercedes can defeat physics, as I try to frame it, then what an interesting season this could be for Antonelli.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a absolutely fascinating prospect, because we've seen Kimi do some extraordinary things, marking himself out as quite, from the pack and among his peers throughout his brief car racing career. And we saw a little glimpse of it before it crashed at Monza. And I think with a season's testing, he's going to be very well prepared in terms of mileage, with the mileage that he's done in the old car, and what he's going to be doing, that back at the factory. I think we're going to see a much more rounded, consistent speed than we saw in that brief but dazzling appearance at Monza. And I think Antonelli at his peak is going to be dynamite. I really do believe that, and there's a reason why they wanted him in the team the moment that Lewis informed them of his decision. So we're going to see some quite spectacular things from him, I think. But yes, George is, by de facto assigned the status of team leader. But that doesn't mean he's always going to be quicker. I don't think he will be. I think there'll be days when he's the second quickest.
Let's move on to our fourth battleground now, Nelson. I'm calling this Red Bull versus itself, because Red Bull hasn't made life at all easy for itself of late. So it has to be Red Bull versus itself, doesn't it? The key element is probably if it can turn around the performance slide of last year with a new car, but I'm sure there's many other elements that will get involved as well, given everything that's been going on there over the past 18 months or so.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like at least the war between Jos and the Red Bull leadership has totally simmered down. There's still an unease there, and I think there's also still an unease between Max and Red Bull leadership at this point. That can all be put to rest if the car is quick, but I've always been confused this year by the fact that this car has had one single trait, and that's oversteer going into a corner, corner understeer, and oversteer out. And that's the Red Bull's been the most consistent of all the cars in the field, just in a very bad way. That needs to be solved, and I don't know at the end of a regulation set if you can change the DNA of your design to such an extent that you can change it, but they will have to, because the way Max attacks a corner, he is vulnerable with that problem in the Red Bull, and he hates it. He really, really hates driving the car when it's struggling like that with that particular thing. And then it really becomes a very quickly a very unhappy team, and then it will be Red Bull against itself again. So yeah, it is problematic, and I don't know how they'll solve it in such a short time.
I guess the big question mark is whether those changes you can make with the air elasticity that's permitted, if they can make gains on that, understand it, adapt the concept to make the most of that, then they could make a leap. So you can, at this stage, we've got no data to go on. We could argue it both ways. Either they've got a big step that they can take, therefore great, there's potential, or it's a big step they need to take and they're trying to catch up with progress other teams have made. So which of those would you like to hang your hat on with absolutely no evidence either way?
Oh. Mark, this one is for you.
I would go with Pierre Vache, Red Bull's technical director, and the way that he explained it towards the end of the season, his understanding of where they were at and the reason why as they tried to apply more load to the car and developing it, it became more unbalanced. And he attributes it to that we were talking about before. The reason why they had a quick car before was they were able to achieve it through mechanical means, through having a softer suspension than the others. And they were able to run a softer suspension because it had much more sympathetic aerodynamics. And so they could always have decent downforce throughout the speed range. Not always the best, but just good throughout the speed range, combined with adjustability to give Max the balance he needed. And as the others have brought aeroelastic front wings to their cars, they could retain the downforce, the high downforce, and the consistent balance in low speed and high speed, because you can just run the front wing at a higher angle and it then stalls out at higher speeds. So you get the low speed response and you get the high speed stability. And that's what Red Bull cannot do. It's as they try to put more load on, it exaggerates one trait or the other. It exaggerates the difficulty on corner entry or slow speed or high speed. There isn't a happy place for it, and especially when it's being pushed as hard as Max naturally drives it. So following that logic, if it would seem that there's no option for Red Bull to get out of this sort of cul-de-sac without following on the aeroelasticity. And I said, how come you didn't go down that route? And he said, there was a cost cap. He said that the cost cap and the resource and the personnel split between the 25 and the 26 car. He said, we couldn't have done it. And so, presumably they can do it on the 25 car. So I would expect it to have every bit as much aeroelasticity as we saw on the McLaren, and in which case it might be a much easier car to balance than that. If I had to hang my hat on it, I'd go with Pierre, because he's much better informed than I am.
Also, you can say that Red Bull has quite a good history in terms of the work it's done on aeroelasticity. Over the years, they've had all sorts of work they've been doing. They're one of the teams that really started to push that ever more in Formula One as well. So I feel like the underlying knowledge and the sort of proprietary technology that they've got, because a lot of the top teams that have got that in terms of what they're doing, in terms of the manufacturing of parts, should allow them to do that in a controllable way. So if you can do that and then you get your car concept right to optimize that, then it's all great. But it's the classic thing, isn't it, Nelson? On paper, in theory, yeah, should be doable, and Red Bull's clearly not forgotten how to be a very good Formula One team. But I guess if you're Red Bull, you'll think, right, this is the right direction, this is looking good, but you just don't know whether goalposts might move elsewhere, or if you can get it as right as others do. That's I don't think any of those top teams would bet anything significant on being the strongest at the start of the year.
Testing is going to be so fun. I'm really looking forward to seeing onboards of that Red Bull and seeing if the dynamics of the way the drivers have to manhandle it through a corner have changed, and whether or not the aero elasticity has actually improved. I'm almost ready to pack my bags and go, because this is going to be a mega season for so many reasons, and this is one of them.
Excellent. It's great to see so much enthusiasm for testing, but that is going to be fascinating. People always say testing doesn't tell you anything, but it's the start of also, there's lots of things you can see, and you might not be able to sort of fully contextualize it and understand it at the time, but there's loads to learn. And I love that ramp up when you go from no knowledge just to gradually building up. And from start to end of testing, you learn lots of bits. It's compared to what you will learn, it's not a great deal, but that's the journey of the season, which I always enjoy.
Run a restaurant and you learn pretty quick. The sound of a crisp fry starts way before the first bite. As delivery and to-go keeps business booming,
Order for pickup.
McCain's SureCrisp fries keep orders crispy.
Hey, delivery.
After the trip, the crispiness comes through. McCain's SureCrisp fries. Go the distance. See how far our fries can take your business at surecrisp.com/delivery.
Rated RP to M. You're listening to an ad for PC Game Pass. Want new games on day one like Avowed or Football Manager 25? Say nothing if you're getting excited. Thought so. Did I mention legendary franchises like Diablo? And all for one low monthly price? 3 words. We got you. Learn more at xbox.com/PC Game Pass. Some games reference coming soon. Game catalog varies by region and over time. Any questions? I'm just kidding. I can't hear you.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kann du Norsk?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Okay, on to our next battleground, Mark. That's the teams versus 2026. This is about the invisible battle in the background. We've alluded to it already, but the need to get work done on the all-new regs for 2026 and still make the most of 2025. And of course, remember the aero testing window opens at the start of January 2026. Aero testing, so CFD and wind tunnel work, was banned on the 26 cars until the start of January. So how do you think teams will manage this balancing act?
I think it depends very much on where they're placed and if they are fighting if they expect to be fighting for a championship or not in 25. And I would, for example, think that Aston Martin would be going all out on 26 and would just get the 25 cars sort of as functional and well-mannered as they can make it, and then just almost forget about it, and the big focus being on the 26 car. If you're Ferrari, this is there's a massive opportunity. If you're Mercedes and you think the 25 car is good, yeah, you may put a lot into it, but if it becomes apparent after, say, 3 or 4 races that they've got another difficult car, then yeah, you would think that they would probably shift their emphasis. So I think in all the cases, and also the complicating factor of the different wind tunnel time and CFD resource restrictions, I think if in that complete mix, you're going to see some very, very different approaches in how that balancing act is done. I don't think there's going to be a standard way of doing it. Yeah, and there's no optimum solution either, is there? Because inevitably, anything you do on 26, you're not doing on 25, and vice versa. There's no happy medium. Okay, some knowledge is transferable, etc., but there's a very finite amount of aero testing resource, and on top of that, the design resource you're putting into it. So there has to be a split. What I'm really interested in is how teams set themselves once they know where they are. The first few races they'll get a feel for whether they're in a championship fight or not. The team I'm really interested in, though, Nelson, is Red Bull, to go back to the one we were talking about, because they've got this extra problem of the Max question, as in,
yes, yeah,
how committed is he to Red Bull? Because there may be a point where you think, actually, no, we just want to make sure we get through 25, however, make sure we're there for 26. But they want to make sure they hang on to Max, so they want to make sure they give him a car that can be competitive, because he'll want to win championships. And then if they end up just in a slightly awkward position where they're thereabouts but not right there, could that distort what would be a good sound engineering approach? Because they think, hang on a minute, we've got to make sure we hang on to this prize asset. I wouldn't like to be making the decisions there on that.
No, that's a good point. And they have no plan B now. They didn't sign Carlos Sainz in the middle of the year. They don't have a driver on their payroll at the moment that is of a quality like Norris, like Leclerc, like Max. So that's going to further incentivize keeping Max happy. And the only way to keep him happy is to give him a competitive car. It's not money. It's not anything else. No, it's a competitive car. So we're in this situation where it's a question who blinks first by switching to the 26 car. And yes, Red Bull might be forced, if they're close to a title fight, to keep pouring resources in that car to at least keep their lead driver on board. And that must be a horrible situation to be in. But that ties in with Red Bull against themselves. It's a situation that has been created by a couple of decisions, and they will have to live with it. It's going to be very interesting. Also, because at some point in the next few months, he will become a father. And if he is not in the title fight and he's really not interested for the rest of the season, what happens then? What happens when he's fighting for fifth and he has to choose between driving a car he hates or spending some extra time with family and sitting out the rest of the season, for instance, and working on a deal that works better for him? Red Bull is just stuck with this situation, and they can only get out of it by building a title-winning car.
Yeah, which they will be banking on, certainly. But the other interesting thing about this battle, Mark, is obviously, I said it's invisible. It's also delayed, if you like, in that there's obviously a big lag between the work you're doing and the design work, the wind tunnel, etc., and actually putting it on the car. So you also can't fully react to what your competitors are doing. Because if you react, you're reacting to what they're doing 6 weeks ago or something, because that's when you might see it on track. And history tells us as well that if you're in a title fight, people will push on with development. I think as we saw in 21 with that remarkable title fight with Mercedes and Red Bull battling on. 2008, before the new regs, McLaren were bringing an upgrade to the last race in Interlagos, weren't they, with Lewis Hamilton chasing the championship. So if there's a live title battle, you have to go for it, really. You can't turn down the chance to win an F1 World Championship, even if it might put you in a slightly weaker position for the following year, because you can't swap a guaranteed shot at success now for very hypothetical success tomorrow.
Yeah, that's very true. And it just underlines the agonising choices that some of them are going to have to make. And, in addition to all that, how does the, say, a set number of hours of development on the 25 car in terms of the increased performance, how does that compare to the same amount of time being switched to the 26 car? And one engineer I spoke to said because of the way that the development curve's flattened out now on this regulation set, he would expect the time spent on the 26 car to be something like 5 times more productive in terms of lap time than spending it on the 25 car. So there's that as well. There's always, you get much more, the engineers get much more excited by big chunks being made on the 26 car than a couple of hundredths on the 25 car. But it might turn out that those couple of hundredths are absolutely vital in the title fight. And that's, we did see that to an extent in 24.
My wild card in this is Alpine, because if it's true that Flavio Briatore has a mandate to sell that team, a tremendous 25 is the best selling point he could have. And if he comes out of the block fighting with that team the way it has developed in the last half of the 24 season, and they sort of sniff a possibility to get fourth in the constructors, for instance, he's going to go for it and then take that as proof of concept and look what my team is worth, no matter what the collateral is down the line for the 26 car, because that won't be his problem then anymore. So that's something I'm looking at with interest with Alpine.
Yeah, I think that's a quite compelling argument for what you're saying there. So you can kind of divide up the rest of the teams because, I think there's a good chance Alpine might go that way. Aston Martin, I think it makes perfect sense for them to focus a great deal of resource on 2026. That's a logical move for them. Williams, we know, have pretty much said, it's 2026, 25, we'll just sort of get through. I suspect teams like Haas will be quite pragmatic about it. They'll probably have a fairly orthodox sort of split and stick with it, I would imagine. For them, Sauber, who knows? My inclination is to suspect they'll get it wrong, whatever. But we did start to see some progress at the back end of the year. But also, 26 is the Audi year, isn't it? So they're not going to put extra resource to try and finish 8th or 7th rather than 9th or 10th.
No, but in their case, they still have to learn so much about this regulation set and all the dynamics that come from these floors, and that will carry over that knowledge into 26 as well. They are lagging behind so much that they almost have to make those steps and keep learning to be in a position to be okay-ish in 26. So they're in a spot of trouble there as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, that underlying science knowledge. And the other thing I think Sauber need to do is just sharpen up operationally. They've got a lot they need to do. Jonathan Wheatley's obviously coming in next year, but not for a good while. So there's a lot of stuff they're doing that's behind other teams, just in the terms of the way they operate. There's so much that team needs to do. So yeah, this is going to be a really, really fascinating challenge that's going on, but it's going to be very, very hard to tell because people are only going to talk in general terms about what they're doing. And we should add as well to that decision-making process, of course, if you decide to bias more earlier to 26 and you're saying, well, maybe we'll be low in the championship, you'll then get more aerodynamic testing allowance for the second half of the year when the ATR resets. So there's all of these little things there to factor in. Right, let's get on to our final battleground now, Nelson.
The best one.
Exactly. We've given you the hospital pass on this one. There's always battles off track, aren't there? And I don't think we've heard the last of the drivers versus the FIA one. The drivers weren't delighted there was no response from FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem over the concerns they expressed late last year. Where do you see the balance of power being there? What's going to happen?
Well, the balance of power is whatever the president makes it to be, because he seems totally unbothered by making enemies that can't vote for him in the next election anyway. So he doesn't seem like the person to back down. FIA is really not pleased, if you read between the lines, and also if you speak to them behind the scenes, as it were. They're not pleased by the stance of the GPDA. They are not pleased by the drivers. They seem to be not as pleased as you think with for instance, Alex Wirtz. So this feels like the president isn't going to back down. Ben Sulayem is not going to back down. And then it becomes interesting, because what is the breaking point then? Where will it flare up again? And what is the alternative the drivers have? A strike? Can you imagine what that does? But that hurts FOM more than it hurts the FIA, because a strike against commercial the commercial activities of FOM will not be really looked on favorably as well. So how do you hit the FIA with this? And that's a position that Ben Sulayem has carved out for himself now by dividing competencies between the FIA and FOM. The FIA is suddenly in a position where, how do you hurt them if you are the drivers or the GPDA? How do you force them into your corner? So I think they might be struggling to get him to listen.
Yeah, and I think the really odd thing with this is there's that push and pull going on, isn't there? Because we've got the drivers talking about the need for permanent professional stewards, and we should say that means professional in terms of literally being paid full-timers, not professional in approach, because there are some very professional stewards in their approach. And Ben Sulayem will say, yeah, fine, who's paying for it?
I doubt the war chest is empty at the FIA.
Well, no, very much not, but they're pushing for more money, aren't they? They've set out their stall not to do that. So they'll say, right, F1, as in FOM, you pay, and they won't want to, and the teams won't want to, and it'll go round and round in circles, and all the time we'll have the stuff going on with, race directors, who knows whether that might change again down the line, with everything else. It feels really unsatisfactory, doesn't it, Mark, in that this argument's been going on, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere specifically, except to just more trouble.
Yeah, there's antagonism, and there's trenchant positions being taken, and I agree with Nelson's point about the drivers are relatively powerless to do much about that aspect of, they've tried appealing with reason, and that has not had any impact, and he's just not interested in engaging in their concerns. And so I think really this antagonistic approach would only be able to be countered by F1 itself. And, there's long been discussion, why does F1 need the FIA? It doesn't necessarily in theory, but it would be a very, very messy disentanglement, and there's all sorts of big questions that, nobody really wants to get into. So I think the will would be there as a preference from the commercial side of Formula One to keep things as they are. But the more that Bin Sulayem takes this antagonistic approach, the more that question mark comes up. So it's a long-term process, I think, and it's not obvious where it's heading at the moment.
Well, what you are seeing is that FOM is starting to learn how to organize and promote their own races. So there is that. And once FOM actually totally aligns with the drivers and the teams on what they want, and they could get, for instance, backing from Saudi Arabia, which seems the most likely one, then there is a case to be made for why do we really need the FIA? At that point, it gets super messy. Like, that's an IndyCar card split that we don't really want. But there is an end game there where it doesn't really work out well for the FIA if they actually decide we don't need you personally anymore and we'll do something else. But we're ways off in that respect. There's a long way off there.
Yeah, and I think there is an element to which a resolution needs to be found as well, because, like I say, theoretically, you could find a way to regulate it without the FIA, but that'd be very complicated. And
well, you can imagine that he then says, okay, all the tracks that host an F1 race, you lose your FIA certification for anything else you want to do. That is the next tit for tat you could get. So there's a whole host of problems there as well.
Exactly. Plus, they split in the first place because you couldn't have the commercial rights holder and the regulator being the same thing. So there's that question as well. So this has to come together, but it's that feeling that the dialogue's kind of melted away. And it's troubling because I think F1 does work better when there's a proper collaborative atmosphere. Not really, on track, fine, it's competitive, they're competing. So yeah, go for it. But off track, you want the three pillars of Formula One, which is the regulator, the FIA, the commercial rights holder, FOM, F1 itself, if you like, and the teams. They need to collaborate in a meaningful way, and it's concerning. It's not really gone that way, and obviously the drivers are part of that. So, yeah, I can't imagine we're not going to hear a lot more of this in the coming season, which might lead to some wearied sighs from people because people don't like this. But it's been the case in Formula One. It's more often than not, there's been this battle, hasn't there, Mark? Certainly over the last 4 decades, there's been versions of this battle. It goes between being an all-out war down to just being bubbling under. We've had little periods of silly pettiness. Remember, who can put what boards where? Can it be in the garage, or is it allowed to be out in the pit lane because FIA controls the garage and F1 can say into the pit lane? There's been all this pettiness, even when it hasn't been something really obvious going on.
Yeah, there was a brief period of relative stability in the relationship when Jean Todt was the president. He was less controversial than either his predecessor or his successor, but usually there is this it's like a fault line where in the plates, the tectonic plates of power sometimes move, and the fault line opens up and then closes back up again, and it ends up in a different place. So yeah, I think it's just part and parcel of the sport, to be honest.
Yeah, very, very much so. But the great thing is there's so many talking points for the new season, which is why we're excited about 2025, particularly Nelson, who's heading to testing already, so we can get there a good 6 weeks in advance. Any storylines we haven't touched that people are excited about? Got loads of drivers in new places.
Well, we've got a real rookie championship this year. We've got a whole host of rookies finally. So that's something to look forward to, how they all fare, how long Jack Doohan's contract is actually worth, and what else is going to happen there. But there's so many new names, and I'm really excited about Bortoleto. Bortoleto, I think, is the real deal. He'll have a tough year with Sauber, that's for certain, but I think he will be one of the surprises of the year.
Yeah, I think he could be a really interesting one to follow. How about you, Mark? What's exciting you? Any of the established drivers catching your eye we haven't talked about?
No, I think the Kimi Antonelli and the Hamilton versus Leclerc are the two obvious ones that excite me most. The prospects of both those subjects, and how that's all going to play out. But there's going to be things we nobody could have envisaged that are just going to appear from left field. Like we saw this year with Colapinto, and how's how's that going to resolve? What's the new storyline going to be the equivalent of that? And there's all sorts of things that we just couldn't anticipate that I'm sure are going to be big stories as well.
That's the great joy of Formula One. I'll throw in one established driver. I'm very interested to see the Carlos Sainz-Williams relationship getting going and what he can bring there, because he's a driver who has, I think, a lot to offer, and that's a team that's going places but has a lot of work to do. Well, hopefully we've whetted your appetite for the upcoming 2025 season, so Happy New Year to everyone, because as I say, it's definitely 2025 as we're recording this. Thanks very much to Nelson and to Mark. And we're going to keep on talking through the year, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of F1 2025.
The Athletic.
The first ever 12-team college football playoff is set, and you can join me, David Ubben.
And me, two-time national champion Alabama, Damian Harris.
And me, Chris Vanini, two-time national champion in the College Football 25 video game.
On Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast for all the playoff previews, predictions, coaching carousel, and transfer portal news 4 times a week throughout the CFP. Dame, how you think Bama's going to do in the playoffs?
Shut up, David. Listen, the Tide may be out of the playoffs, but I'm super excited to see the 12 best teams in the nation play.
All the banter, insights, and more on Until Saturday. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.